Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you. And my thanks to Jaivir and Avatar Foundation for this opportunity. I'd also like to thank the Alliance Francaise for generously providing us with the space. My thanks to Harini for her research and for creating the PowerPoint presentation. And my heartfelt thanks to all of you for being here today. The objective of this lecture series is to trace the threads of connection and continuity within the Madras Art School. The aim is not only to contribute to the existing literature, but to open up new ways of seeing and understanding its evolution. The Madras art movement came at the end of more than 100 years in making. Over this long period, the institution evolved through multiple phases, beginning with Alexander Hunter, who founded what he called a school of useful and ornamental arts. One, one that, in his words, would bring incomparable benefits not only to the countries which supported them, but to the world at large. His interest in scientific use of locally found materials for protection of utilitarian objects led to the establishment of an industrial design section in the college. At one point, this section was producing a wide range of industrial products that contributed to the urban growth of the city. Robert Chessum's collaboration with the college's industrial section, using it to produce objects for his architectural projects, gradually shifted the emphasis from industrial production to one of decorative arts. The arrival of E.B. Havel as the head of the institution marked a radical shift. Trained at the South Kensington College in Britain during the height of the arts and craft movement, Havel brought with him a philosophy that deeply influenced the school's direction. The arts and crafts movement had emerged as a reaction to the modern conditions brought about by industrialization and the division of labor. The mechanical reproduction of objects had created a society that had lost its touch with nature, alienating people from their human and creative instincts. As a counter to this, the movement raised the figure of the craftsman as both a moral and an aesthetic ideal, one who would work with their hands in harmony with materials and skill. The craftsman came to symbolize integrity and the creative spirits vital to the moral and spiritual growth of a society. He embodied the unity between art, labor, and life that industrial modernity had fractured. In India, where labor was often hereditary, Hebel saw in the Indian craftsman a repository of traditional knowledge, an inherited wisdom passed from one generation to the other, a living link to the artistic continuity. He believed this as a means to revive Indian handicrafts and reconnect art with its cultural roots. To this end, artisans from across Tamil Nadu were brought into the school, Stabatis from Swami Malai for metal casting and beaten metal work, and carpenters from Pudukkottai for woodwork, among others. In order to encourage the children of artisans, all admission fees for the artistic and industrial departments were waived. The School of Arts Museum became a space for displaying India's visual past, where Havel encouraged students from both the fine arts and industrial sections to study traditional objects as models. The Madras School was not alone in this approach. John Lockwood Kipling, head of the Mayo School of Arts in Lahore, and like Havel, trained in South Kensington, organized the Lahore School along similar lines, transforming it into an artisan workshop and abolishing classes in drawing from Western models that remained part of the curriculum elsewhere. Havel viewed the preservation of craft tradition not merely as a colonial responsibility to uplift the declining handicraft sector or to improve native tastes, but as an act of resistance against Western materialism. Unlike in the West, where art and crafts were seen as separate domains, in the Eastern context they were inseparable. The craftsman was the artist, and the artist was the craftsman. This perspective led Havel to reevaluate the very idea of Indian fine arts, laying the intellectual foundation what would become the Bengal revivalist movement. W.S. Hardaway, another proponent of the arts and craft movement, became the head of the Madras School of Art in the early 20th century. He authored two books, one on cotton paintings and printings in Madras Presidency, and another on brass and copper works. Under his tenure, textiles were introduced into the craft section, and his writings mention the employment of cotton painters within the school. For nearly 80 years since its inception, until Roy Chowdhury's taking charge as the principal, the Madras School of Art functioned primarily as a craft centric institution, offering training in metal casting and sheet metal work, wood carving and furniture making, enameling, inlay, filigree jewelry, ceramics, and textiles. Roy Chowdhury shifted the focus of the institution by emphasizing the creation of individuals with artistic agency. His belief in fine artist as a transformatory figure in the cultural narrative marked the transition of the school from craft to fine art. K.C.S. Paniker, who became the principal in 1957, was leading the institution in a post-independent India that faced a different set of challenges. There was an urgency to address the backwardness that affected almost every sphere of life. Modernity was seen as a tool of emancipation, an essential means for India to stand alongside the rest of the modern world. This propelled the nation's outlook and policies. The Bombay Progressive represented the modernist aspirations of this new India. They believed that modernity was a shared condition, common to all, and saw their works as internationally relevant and avant garde as those of their Western counterparts. In 1940s, Paniker was drawn to modern art movements. He saw in them a great freedom, the possibility to express a personal vision, to create one's own grammar, syntax, words, and meaning. He innately understood that the world had moved on and that modern art offered a space open to integration rather than insularity. He actively encouraged his students to engage with Western art, discussing it with them, providing books and reference materials. The marked influence of these initiatives can be seen in the works of his students in the 50s. Yet, unlike the Bombay progressives, Paniker did not embrace modernism with unreserved enthusiasm. He was looking at a wider picture. For him, Byzantine, Gothic, and Renaissance art were as significant as the art of Ajanta, the Pallavas, and the Cholas. And Jamni Roy was as important as Cezanne. For him, world art functioned as a single discourse. The artistic spirit that flowed between them was his true calling. Paniker's dialogue with art critic Ludwig Goldschneider turned to be a moment of epiphany. In a letter to Paniker in 1954, Ludwig writes, I'm quoting a part of his letter, an Indian artist on the other hand cannot merely study Ajanta and Tanjore wall paintings and imitate them on a smaller scale. This would not make him a modern master. He has to go through the school of world art. But to become a genuine artist, he is not allowed to forget or surpass his racial and national way of seeing and feeling and shaping. He has to be an Indian artist or nothing at all. He further writes, you are one of the very few Indian painters who went through the ordeal of Western teaching and came out unbroken. Your painting are not the translation from the French, not based on models which one does not quite know whether they still belong to modern French art. Neither are they enlarged Indian miniatures or reduced Indian rock paintings. They are as competent as anything done by the younger European painters, and at the same time, they are very Indian. In 1950s, Paniker's works reflected an increasing dissatisfaction with the Western influence. Yet, turning towards the traditional would have been a regressive step and was therefore not an option. The way forward was to take modern route to arrive at an artistic idiom that was native yet contemporary to its time. He says, I quote, I was aware early enough that unless one was able to grasp and assimilate the fundamentals of Western modern art, it would not be possible to contribute anything worthwhile to the art of our country. Paniker felt a close affinity to Paul Klee than to any other Western artist. His works reminded him of the Orient, and in the sun-drenched light of Tunisia and Egypt, Klee saw lines, colors, patterns, geometry, cuneiforms, hieroglyphics, calligraphies, and algebra. They kindled in him the deeply buried ancient memory of European Oriental past. The abstraction and symbolism that these carried, though now stripped of its original meaning, accentuated the perplexities of modern condition, allowing both reconciliation and estrangement. Paniker found in Klee a mentor, guiding him through the contradictions that modernity posed. He knew he had to begin new all again to create what he called Indian and worldwide contemporary. Thus, in 1963, he began the Word and Symbol series, a chance sighting of a young student's mathematics notebook, Arabic figures, Latin letters, symbols of algebra and mathematics, and the linear formations of geometry, stirred in him a multitude of visions, a moment akin to Yashoda glimpsing the cosmos in a child's mouth. An illegible scribble on a paper could hold within it the magical connotation of a cosmic truth. William Blake, in his poem Auguries of Innocence, captures this presciently. To see a world in a grain of sand, a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. Art is one of the means through which the cosmic and the mystery of life origins can be expressed. Paniker's Words and Symbols series perhaps emerged from the existential queries that arises when one confronts the immensity of space and the challenge of giving form to the ineffable. His paintings suggest celestial patterns, constellation, astrological charts, mathematical calculation, sacred geometry, and cryptic words. Lines take precedence and color becomes secondary. Paniker applies oil color in thin layers, producing a luminous transparency that contrasts with the traditional use of thick impasto, which lends painting a flesh-like texture and physical presence. Colors look, look desaturated, giving a feeling of a weathered, plastered wall of a mural or a manuscript painting. To an Indian mind, it creates a sense of familiarity, a living tradition that is visible all around him or her. His lines, what he called the Indian line, are beautifully rendered, drawn with grace and clarity. But Paniker's engagement with tradition goes beyond mere surface reimagining. Otherwise, it would have become imitative, devoid of context. So, what is it that he is driving towards? How does it become modern? What makes it modern? Apart from formalism, the early modernist concern with line, color, and composition as independent bearers of meaning, the work does not necessarily become modern through form alone. For it to be truly modern, it must articulate and express the very condition of modernity. Kafka's stories are good examples that portray the conditions of modernity. It never tries to be modern by using a trope. Kafka's short story, Before the Law, tells of a man who seeks entry to the law but is stopped by a doorkeeper. Though the door is open, he is never allowed to enter. He waits his entire life pleading for access, only to be told at the end that the door was meant for him alone and will now be closed. Paniker's Words and Symbols series carries a similar predicament. Tradition, with all its splendor and beauty, seems within reach, visible, tangible, yet never fully accessible. The viewer stands at the threshold, circling endlessly around it but never able to enter it. There is estrangement, waiting, and the unending pursuit of meaning. Yet it is in this awareness of distance and futility that Paniker's modernity emerges, not as a separation from tradition, but as the consciousness of being suspended within it. The 1960s was a period marked by the search for an Indian identity, a time when the desire to become modern without losing cultural bearings weighted heavily on almost every sphere of life. In the field of design, for instance, the Government of India invited Charles and Ray Eames to study the state of design in the country and make recommendations for its future development. Their seminal document, the India Report, in 1958, became the conceptual foundation for the establishment of the National Institute of Design in 1961 at Ahmedabad. The report emphasized that design in India must evolve from the needs, materials, and tradition of its people rather than imitate Western models. Simultaneously, in the field of fine arts, this very search for an Indian identity prompted artists such as K.G. Subramaniam at the Faculty of Fine Arts, Baroda, J. Swaminathan with Group 1819 Bhopal, and K.C.S. Paniker at the Madras Art School to re examine and redefine the direction of Indian contemporary art. Baroda, Bhopal, and Madras emerged as important new centers of artistic exploration. At the Madras School, Paniker developed a strong philosophical framework that drew upon highly evolved skills and more than a century of knowledge assimilation. Paniker did not need to look outside for a traditional model. Within the college itself, some of the finest craftsmen were producing exceptional furnitures, metalwork, jewelry, pottery, and textiles. To further connect with the past, the institution also housed a museum of traditional art with collections dating back to the period of E.B. Havel. Paniker, rather than drawing on overtly Indian themes or specific traditional forms like miniature painting, made the line the central focus, a vehicle for expressing Indianness through form rather than subject. The line has been an unifying element across South Asian art. From the early mural paintings in Ajanta, Sittanavasal, and Peruvudayar to the later paintings of the Vijayanagara, Nayaka, and Tanjore periods, and from the sculptures of Elephanta, Kailasanadar, and Nuhalipuram, and to the Chola bronzes, it is a line that delineates, expresses, and gives life to form. Paniker also sought to engage with regional artistic traditions so that the students could connect with style, material, and emotional expressions grounded in their immediate cultural milieu. Like the Bengal revivalist who understood the politics of material and in rejection of Western cultural hegemony, sorry, like the Bengal revivalist who understood the politics of material and in rejection of Western cultural hegemony, used Oriental materials and mediums such as paper, ink, gouache, and watercolor. The Madras School devised its own form of resistance to the hierarchy of materials. They worked with simple and accessible materials: newsprint papers, charcoal, pen and ink, blotting paper, watercolor, tempera, terracotta, copper sheets, and bronze. Even when using oil colors, they applied them in thin layers, creating a visual effect suggestive of watercolors. In the art school, Paniker continued with the same curriculum. The academic studies such as still life, landscape, portrait, and model drawings were retained. In the initial years, rigorous drawing practice was regarded as a fundamental discipline. Paniker insisted on drawing from life. He argued, if one is not able to draw what he or she sees, how is it possible to draw from imagination correctly? The painting department had Ram Gopal, Anthony Das, and Santan Raj and Munusamy as teachers. Anthony Das, an excellent portraitist, taught model studies in the foundation years, while Santan Raj, Munusamy, and Ram Gopal guided students in the advanced years. Paniker made daily studio visits. He intuitively understood each student's position and need and helped them to find their footing. If he found a student proficient in live drawing, he would urge them to move beyond realism, to experiment with distortion and create new reality drawn from the self. For some like Vidya Shankar Stapati and Janik Raman, he suggested taking up metal sculpture. Through such one-to-one conversation and guidance, Paniker helped many students discover their artistic trajectory. The disconnect between art and craft sections in the art school was gradually restored. It was this restoration and reclaiming of the figure of the craftsman that created a new visual language. Unlike during Roy Chowdhury's period, where individuality, artistic expression, and eclectic choices were foregrounded, this phase emphasized introspection of identity, collective practice, material engagement, and the rediscovery of traditional processes. To craft sections, Two craft sections began to gain more attention: metal casting, beaten metal and relief work, and textiles. Sculpture in the West is based largely on clay modeling, molding, and casting, resulting in rounded forms that can be viewed from all directions. In contrast, Indian traditional sculpture is mostly frontal, created for religious purposes and intended to be viewed from the front. Metal as a material had inherent limitation that made it ideal for such frontal forms, a quality that became a catalyst to the Madras artist exploration and experimentation with form, signifying both tradition and modernity. In the textile section, South Indian cotton painting or kalamkari served as another major source of inspiration. Textiles can be seen as a continuation of South Indian mural painting, retaining its decorative, iconic, and narrative qualities. The use of the pen or kalam to draw outlines of motifs and figures gave these cotton paintings their distinct character, with blotted lines, accidental marks, and colors that bled beyond the edges. Compared to oil painting, they possessed an incredible lightness, a sense of chance, and a playful spontaneity. This lent the artist a new freedom to see process, accident, and imperfection as integral to the work, and as an expression of modern visual identity grounded in India's artistic tradition. Batik was also introduced to students. It became a creative process in itself, and with its growing demand, a source of income and support. In most schools, artistic spirit, intellectual inquiry, critical thinking, and aesthetic judgment are given primacy, while skill, material handling, and labor are often considered secondary. In the Madras Art School, however, skill, understanding, and dexterity in handling of materials, along with labor, were seen as primary, forming the foundation for developing aesthetic judgment and artistic spirit. In the Madras Art School vernacular, two Tamil words are used to describe a good artist: Nalla Velakara and Ulaipali. The former refers to craftsmanship, hands on skill, expertise, quality, and dedication. The later the later to labor, the effort one invests in the act of making, the bodily engagement of the artist, rather than delegating the task to others, and was seen as an essential to integrity of the work. These values still continue to shape the thought, identity, and practice of artists associated with the Madras School. And what you could see is the jewelry. It's a silver jewelry work, filigree work, which is on the left. And this chair, they had a very good craft section, wood furniture making section. So the chair was made in the college, and it's still there in the college. And that's a photograph of Paniker with batik. Dhanapal took charge as head of the sculpture department in 1957. His work in the 1940s and 50s can be described as his figurative phase, while by the 1960s he was moving towards the simplification of forms. In Christ bearing the cross, the interest lies not only in its formal qualities, but also in the effortlessness in its making, a lightness of touch. The subject depicting the unfolding of a great tragedy is already laden with emotion. Yet Dhanapal avoids exaggeration. He gently leads the viewer to sense the subtle pain and quiet suffering. The body is almost invisible. The hands, the second most expressive part after the face, are reduced to a lump. The cross itself is barely indicated. It is the tilted head that draws the attention. The large eyes gazing heavenwards, the flowing beard and moustache, and like an Eastern deity, a faint smile that conveys a sense of resignation or acceptance. Dhanapal resists the temptation to make what is already terrible terrible. He reveals by not revealing the tragedy. I return to Santanraj's drawing, The Prodigal Son. For those who are not present in the previous lecture, The Prodigal Son is a parable from the Gospel. It tells the story of a son who lives a life of dissipation, squanders his inheritance, and later realizes his mistakes, repents, and returns to his father seeking forgiveness. The story is ultimately about redemption, of being lost and found, of being dead and coming back to life. Santan Raj internalizes this narrative, transforming it into an Indian myth, and by using the visual language of Pallava bas relief sculptures as a vehicle to envision the story. Although this parable appears only in the Gospel of Luke, it became a significant iconography in Western art, particularly during the Baroque period and the Counter-Reformation movement. In Santanraj interpretation, the vision is ephemeral, constructed through broken and bleeding lines. The composition is anchored by interspersed ink washes that create a shallow space, resulting in a deeply moving image of repentance and benevolence. But there is something else happening in this drawing, and it is not merely an Indian version of a Western iconography. Framed within the concerns of the Madras Art Movement, it opens a new direction, that of the subjective in art, the revelation of an artist's inner life. Santan Raj is alluding to the very nature of art making and the artist himself. Like the prodigal son, the artist is a one who must journey beyond boundaries. He or she becomes the outsider, one who must witness, even inhabit the lower life. In the parable, the son becomes a keeper of swine, a symbol of impurity and defilement. The artist too must plumb the depths of darkness, have an awareness of the evil that is possible within oneself. To have the pact with the devil, that is the burden of the artist. But by his very nature, he is drawn to the forbidden. Art making, the art of creating in the likeness of nature, has often been seen as an abominable act. In some religion like Islam, making is prohibited because it is viewed as a violation of divine creation. Yet it is precisely from this violation, from the violent experiences, from the dark recesses of society and the mind, that the artist returns. He returns to the realm of the light and living, bearing the knowledge of both darkness and grace, acknowledging the need to turn towards the good and to embrace the God self. The composition suggests a cyclic nature, the to and fro of departure and return. The artist's role is that of a transporter, moving eternally between sin and redemption, bringing the unknown unseen that may carry at the times of distress succor to the parched soul. So I'm just suggesting there is a cyclic composition has a cyclic nature, and the figure reclining figure is the sun, and then again you can just go back. So it's like it's working in a clockwise direction. And this is about L. Munuswamy. In 1940s in India, as elsewhere, was a time of emerging modernity. New industries were being established, the economy was changing, and there was a surge of people seeking new professions through education and learned skill. Munuswamy was one among them. Though born into an artisan family attached to a temple in Mylapore, he sought a livelihood not in his hereditary occupation, but in the new world that had much to offer. His first work, he first worked as a ticketing clerk at Chitra Theatre and later in his brother's photographic studio. His growing interest in painting led him to several studios of banner artists active around the time. In their discussions, he was introduced to the works of the Impressionists. From illustrated magazines they collected for reference, such as the Illustrated London News, he saw reproductions of famous paintings. Mathe's Fauvis portrait of his wife, with a green strip down her nose, was a revelation and became the subject of many discussions among them. Eventually, he found employment as a clerk in a depot of medical supplies. Fortunately for him and for us, the depot stood opposite the Madras School of Art. His meeting with Dhanapal and Dhanapal's encouragement led him to join the college in 1948. What we see from his earliest works is a complete freedom from the usual concerns of tradition and modernity. With his familiarity with tradition through his family lineage and his encounter with modernity through the banner painters of Madras, he makes no attempt to build a bridge between the two or to create a deliberate hybridity. Instead, this coexistence of influences liberated him. We can discern in Munuswamy's methods of working an influence of banner painters. In his broad brushstrokes, the fluidity of color, and the use of strong primary tones. His immediate environment became the subject of his paintings. people, animals, birds, and nature. He does not separate them. Rather, they fuse together to form a new body, a living entity that pulsates with energy. His works show a similarity to the biomorphic paintings of the American expressionists, arrived through surrealism and automatism. Yet here the specificity of place, people, and things became his configuration of lived experience. It is personal, shaped by the tradition he knew from an young age, the bright fluid colors of cinema banners, the lessons he learned at the Madras School, and by being part of a community of great teachers and peers, questioning and creating a new visual vocabulary. All these elements come together in his painting in unison. Among the small wonders of art is the fact that a simple green line drawn by Matisse, perpendicular to a face, could revolutionize modern art in South India. This again is work by Munaswamy. Ramanujam's house was in or near what used to be Bharatiya's house in Triplicane. His father's friend was known to Dhanapal, and through that connection began his formal learning in art. He spoke very little, and even when he did, his words were often indistinct. He would walk long distances like Bodilai's Flonir and sometimes disappear for days. Someone would say he was seen in Sri Paramadur or elsewhere, and his parents would go and fetch him back. As a student, he found both home and refuge in the Madras Art School. His wild spirits and itinerant mind finally found the anchor it needed. It was also the beginning of a new movement in the school, where debates around art and craft, tradition and modernity were taking shape. He grasped in a subconscious way the essence of these arguments and connected them with his own practice, memory, and imagination. He created an alternative world for himself, either in the sky or underwater, where the tyranny of words was no longer a necessity. His imagery drew from many sources: the decorative pillared halls of the Parthasarathi temple, the Utsava Vahanas, giant temple cars, set designs and mythological films, dream song sequence, and batik. He floated through this imagined world as a visitor, free to dwell wherever he wished. Sometimes seated beside Vishnu, resting on serpent Sesha, dreaming the universe into being. A dream within a dream, among the apsaras. His faith in the world he created, the labor and craftsmanship and the nativist element and the simple materials he used, gave the Madras art movement an artistic figure that represented it in its entirety. It might have continued endlessly until he paused and thought that the dream he was dreaming had to come to an end. R.B. Bhaskaran was part of the 1960 batch of students, which included K.M. Adimoolam, C. Dakshinamurthy, Velu Vishwanathan, S.G. Vasudev Haridasan, and Muthukoya, among others. Bhaskaran first learnt the techniques of painting in his uncle's studio, which was involved in film production and advertising. Like Munuswamy, his artistic journey began in the popular cultures of Madras. Like many students in the 1960s who were listening to the lofty ideals about rediscovering a nativist authentic self, he too experimented with images that sought to define such ideas. Yet deep inside, he was skeptical of the notion that Indianness could be achieved merely through the use of symbols or mythical narratives, since such an identity could not be centered in any particular geography or people. He believed that each artist carried his own volume of India in his works, without being consciously aware of it in the act of making. In the early 1970s, he began the Life Cycle series, works that explore the universal experiences of birth, life, and death. Done in lino cut, the series conveys the starkness of reality through sharp lines, defined shapes, and flat tones of color. The imprints of Madras School is visible in its grammar, gesture, and material. His continued engagement with the questions of existence and means of expressing it with a distinct language led to several other series: Couples, Cats, and Still Life among them. This is Vishwanathan. Vishwanathan, after school, enrolled at the university to study economics and political science. Not unusual for a young man in Kerala, which had its first elected communist government in 1957. Acutely self aware, he instinctively understood that his aspirations lay elsewhere. Literature and theatre were possibilities, and in a moment of indecision, he joined the Madras Art School. Negation also allows space for what is yet to come. The predictability of academic studies did not interest him. It was during the process of creating a batik work that he stumbled upon the cultural density India had to offer. The abstraction in Indian thought arises from the idea of the Atma as permanent, immortal, and infinite. It gave Vishwanathan a philosophical framework that provided an inexhaustible source of exploration. He painted with canvas placed on the floor and gradually moved from oil and acrylic to watercolors and casein, choices that defined Vishwanathan's position in international abstract art as an artist who could carry his identity and Eastern sensibilities, yet hold his own within the global modernist discourse. Alfonso Aruldas was one of the most technically accomplished artists of the Madras Art School. He was a true student of classical Western painting. His academic studies, portraits, full figures, and still lifes in charcoal and oil stand as perfect examples of keen observation, refined skill, and mastery over medium. He also represented the long tradition of Western style painting that remained prevalent in the school. As a student, we used to feel intimidated by his skill. For portrait demonstrations, he would take a large square canvas and big tubes of color, mostly white and few browns, and position the model under proper light. He would observe the model for a few minutes and start the canvas without any preliminary drawing. Apply color directly and within a few strokes, capture the likeness. And you'd finish the work in about an hour. He approached the idea of Indianness from a Western perspective. His use of oil, charcoal, and pastel to depict Indian themes such as Krishna and Nataraja brought a sense of hybridity to his works. S.G. Vasudev understood the need for a convergence of shared belief and the divergence of individual pursuits. He created a common ground through the Indian subjects he chose. His working method and his use of drawing laid over thin washes of color, as well as materials such as woven tapestry and beaten metal relief. He explored the personal through his need for an intimate connection with nature in Maithuna series, while his Vriksha series came to symbolize shelter, benevolence, and protection of life. In Vasudev's work, the spiritual and the material unite. The tactile surfaces, the craftsmanship, and the symbolism together articulate a visual language that is Indian and contemporary. Again, this is again Vasudev's work, and one on the left is Vriksha, and one on the right is Maithuna. Haridasan took a different path towards realizing an Indian identity, partly influenced by Paniker use of words and symbols. He began to associate with pan-Indian neo-tantric art movement of the 1960s and 70s. Artists like Birande and G.R. Santosh were looking to indigenous sources for answers to Western art movements, especially abstraction. Tantric diagrams and yantra with a strong philosophical underpinnings and fascinating use of geometric forms, patterns, shapes, and colors offered a compelling framework for an Indian alternative. Haridasan was the only South Indian to be part of the movement. T.K. Padmini. T.K. Padmini was from Kerala, whose career, though tragically brief, left a significant mark on Madras Art Movement. In the early 1960s, Padmini joined the Madras School of Art, where her development was influenced by K.C. Paniker and Indian modernity. Initially, her artworks were monochromatic and stylized, resembling her contemporaries. Over time, her style evolved to emphasize strong colors and contour lines. She was inspired by post impressionists and expressionists, especially the symbolic forms found in Paul Gauguin's works. She blended these with rich colors and cultural themes of Kerala. Her predominant subjects were women, landscape, and often foregrounding feminine experience, sexuality, melancholy, and sense of alienation. She created a visual language of combining the natural richness of her environment with women's experience. Through this union, Padmini created an evocative, unique voice. At the Government College of Arts and Crafts, this is Arnava's work, and at the Government College of Arts and Crafts, she found not only a formal discipline but a spirit of singularity, encouraged by Paniker and the energies of the Madras modern. Her practice was marked by deep intimacy with materials, drawing in pen, ink, or liquid washes, copper beaten into form, textile marked with batik, or surface rendered in radiant ceramics. Yet across all of this, a pattern emerges: the column, trees, snakes, birds, and goddesses. Her work embodied both experimentation and rootedness. Arnava's contribution to the Madras art scene lay in her ability to infuse modernist experimentation with a distinct feminine sensibility. It might have led to a new trajectory in the movement, but a sudden demise at an young age brought promising journey to an untimely end. And this again is Arnava's drawings. Vidyashankar Stabati had a long connection with Madras Art School. His paternal great grandfather, Ramaswamy Stabati, had been bought from Swami Malay by E.B. Havel to head the metal craft section. This connection was one of the reasons he joined the school in 1957. Yet he did not wish to remain a traditional artist, he aspired to be a modern one. Recognizing his natural ability, Paniker encouraged him to work with the artisans in the metal crafts. And it was there that he discovered his true mode of expression, a perfect synthesis of craftsmanship, the evocative power of the material, scientific inclination, and labor. That the one on the left is his first or the earliest work he did, uh, and the one in the center is somewhat a matured work. So, and he started experimenting with beat metal, and he was able to bend it, and I know, and then it was also very expressive the way he had worked with it. So, uh, and he had a mixture because of him being a Stabati. He had this. I wouldn't say because of being Stabati, he had a natural ability, but then those traditions it's somehow infused in his work. So, and he was able to sort of bring in a modernity in a traditional aspect. Janaki Raman, this is Janaki Raman's. Janaki Raman spent many years at the art school as a student. The campus with its allure had a way of holding, he spent many years, like almost 14, 15 years in the college. First he studied painting and later he rejoined to study sculpture. Like Vidyashankar Stabati, he found a natural affinity for metal as a material, for its strength and malleability, its ability to be cut into desired shapes, layered and welded into a form. The frontal aspect of traditional sculpture suited the sheet metal technique perfectly, resulting in forms that were once at once indigenous, inventive, and surprisingly modern. And like Ramanujam, Janaki Raman was immediately recognized in the early 60s itself as as a Madras school. Uh, it had all the characteristics of Madras school, and he became very popular in the 60s itself. And you can see his works. It has got a surprising. It's really well crafted, but there is a surprising intuitive, but there's also an innocence in it. The way he has created, and that is and that's what attracts it to people. So this is Dakshinamurthy. He studied painting, and then later he shifted to sculpture. And I think I'll just go to K. Adimoolam because I just wanted to show the whole structure of the Madras College of Art, pedagogy. I think he represents, and one thing I have a collection of his work, so it's in sense imageries. So uh, it is easy to see the progression that the student goes through from the first year and how they gradually progress. As I said, Madras College was more about a rigorous training and the the sort of drawings that they did, observational drawing in the early years in the college, and then how they progress gradually towards distorting the images, creating something, or creating a language for themselves, so and you can and probably this set of works can give you a better idea. And this is him painting in the college, and these are all his early works, portraits that he did. You have those models, and Anthony Das would teach these portrait drawings. And as a matter of fact, lots of students, not many students would were, they all liked realistic paintings. So, they would all do watercolors and landscapes. Only few students who were interested in these sort of dialogues that, that they all a bit, I mean, slowly they changed. And some of the students would only do sort of realistic paintings and finish this course. So in the college there is always this academic studies, the importance for realistic paintings was very strong. So all this one has to go through all this and then transform. That's so you could see that like his strong observational drawing. These are the still life watercolors. This is outdoor study. One on the left is in Mahabalipuram. Sorry, one on, yeah. And this is the entrance towards the college. And you had lots of model studies, including full figure studies. And you can see the shift in, the from realism, where he's using a more, light and dark, mm, color tonal variations, and then you can see the study itself changes. He's using more of the Madras line, where it's only the basic outline that he does, and there's lots of expressive quality. He's not worried about the anatomy, or but it's about the expressive quality. So these are all the human observation drawings that he did. And gradually, when he's there, the third year, fourth year, then there's this distortion that happens. And the one in the center is using a dry brush. Again, lots of artists in the Madras School use this sort of a dry brush method. They would use either Indian ink, dry Indian ink, or oil. This is a portrait of Ramanujam that he did. And he would also do portraits of his friends, and Ramanujam would model for him. There are other smaller sketches too, but then I thought I'm just displaying this too. These are again model studies. It's also a good documentation of the class. He's working, but then the other students are also working. And Bhaskaran had a conversation with Bhaskaran. He said that every day Adimoolam would do at least 3 to 4 drawings. So that was the sort of rigorous. Most of the students did. Those are like really dedicated. And the one on the left is the school, the art school, and that is a church near to the college. It's called St. Andrew's Kirk. And from this illusionistic space, then you can see how he's making it much more flatter and bringing various elements from his whatever he has visually seen. Then he is adding all to that and creating a composition. Now it's more into making compositions. And ultimately this he started this Gandhi series in 69. So he joined the college in 1960, and you can see the progress, how he had progressed, the sort of training and the way he works with the figures. And then he comes to this the series, Gandhi series drawing. This is for the 100 years of Gandhi. Like it was the Gandhi centenary year, and he decided to do 100 drawings for Gandhi. And so you can see the result of all the work. Certain spaces are left out. It's because it's not that it's because he knows, and that he leaves that space. That's sort of a can you see some you don't see the other hand, for example, but still you can make that he's that other hand for the one on the left. Even on the one on the right, you can see lots of, there's only certain suggestive lines, but then you can make the continuation. It's only because of the whole rigorous training that he had. He can do anatomical studies very well. He can do realism really good. And then, he progresses to this. And this is where, the body is still a body. You recognize the resemblance of Gandhi is very strong, but yet, but it's not realistic, in that sense. Yeah. And nobody had captured Gandhi in this sort of a simple lines. What happened was, most of the Gandhi representation which came after post independent was all big monumentals. It was not like simple, because Gandhi had become a father of a huge nation. So it's all monumental sculptures that you have. And then he comes up with a drawing in the 60s which are very simple, very fragile. And this is what I said, the blotting lines, broken lines. These are all the recurrent elements that you can see in the Madras School. And these are the portraits that he did. It's part of the 100 drawings of Gandhi. And anyway, this is the continuation. And later in the 60s, 68, he had the association with the Tamil writers. They start Kasara Tapara, and that begins another sort of a transition period that happens. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's